Hey, what's up, Liron here. Thank you for joining me in today's video, and we're gonna jump into a painting process, which I believe should be relatively easy and straightforward. You're actually gonna see something interesting where one of the biggest mistakes I made personally was in the drawing stage. Surprisingly enough, it's where I didn't establish some of the perspective correctly, and you'll see, mostly with the lines that are vertical, where they should collapse inwards because we're looking at this church, this beautiful structure from below. Okay, I am, however, greatly simplifying the structure. I got most of the overall perspective correctly. You want to start with the big shapes first, establish those, and only then jump into the smaller ones. I'm not going to go too deep on the drawing. I will mention that you can find the sketch if you want to sketch based on my own sketch and just get started from there. I'll put a link in the description box below. And I will mention that this way of greatly simplifying, this approach of simplification, is something I teach in my frustration-free watercolor course. We'll talk about that a little bit later. You can find a link to it in the description box. But for now, notice how, again, I started from the big structure and I'm slowly closing in and starting to establish the actual details. Now, this is what you'll see me doing now, is drawing those shapes of light and shadow for the most part. You see these poles, these structures, there's the right side, left side, and really trying to convey that sense of three-dimensionality. But in any case, the painting is going to be the major focus for this video, and I'm starting by establishing the first wash. Now, how am I approaching the sky here? Actually, wet and wet. I'm pre-wetting the sky so that I can pour in some paint. Now, the reason I decided to do that was because I did want to show the clouds and capture them in a soft way, and one of the best ways to get that softness is wet and wet. It's a technique I don't normally utilize for skies just because I feel like usually it doesn't lead to the result I want, but here it felt inherent to the process, so I went with that. The way I want you to think about this is not just dabbing in random blue areas, but rather how do I leave clouds behind? Because between those blue patches that I put wet and wet, the white shapes that are left are clouds. Okay, now as we move on, I'm starting to establish the building. This is going to be a very simple wash. It's just cool for the sky, warm for everything else. And I actually edited the reference photo, and you can find a link to the reference photo edited to everything, all the images, including my sketch stage, everything in the description box below. But I actually isolated what we're going to paint in every stage of the way. There's a simple method of doing that if you have Photoshop, and I can show you a different video, but for this one, just know I isolated the initial wash, the second wash, and the third wash with the, based on the values. So you get this kind of a framework to work within. All you have to do is really paint the thing that you see in the reference photo. Now we're gonna let this dry for a few more moments and we'll continue. Now, one thing, look at this montage of test paper. Look at how much mixing I need to do before I actually feel like I got the right color in. Okay, so take your time, do a lot of mixing until you get it right. To be honest with you, I feel like my color mixing here was really on point. It's an aspect of my artwork that has greatly improved over the last, I guess, 2 months now, I think, because I've been really focusing on that. I've been doing a lot of digital art and digital color matching off kind of a screen. I haven't shared much of it yet, but that really helped me in seeing the colors more accurately. Something with the ability to just match the color as you see it. I don't know, it helps me better understand what I'm looking at. Now look at this rooftop. It has an interesting play of grays. Some of the grays feel a little more purple, while others feel a little more yellow, and I chose to exaggerate it a bit and to actually divide it to the top yellow that you saw me do, and then the bottom purple muted. Everything is muted here. And this is one of the biggest mistakes amateurs make, is going too saturated. You can do that if you want to be expressive, if you paint a way that is authentic to you, but underneath that, I think there's no need to use too much of very saturated, what does it say, fat, very saturated paint, because there's just not much of it in reality. Now look at these windows too. There's a lot of details within them, a lot of highlights. I'm skipping those and painting them as the mid value. So we're still following the scheme of the mid value that you're seeing here. Painting them from top to bottom and alternating. Again, a lot of the beauty comes in those plays of subtle temperature changes. There are changes, but they're subtle. So it's a bit of a muted yellow, a bit of a muted purple, right? And often you'll see me exploiting this with blues and reds, with greens and reds. It can work with a lot of paints, a lot of interesting colors that you can mix together. The thing though is if you want to get an overall good result is to do it strategically. Have a plan for where you're going to use these, difference in saturations and temperatures. There isn't a right or wrong way to do this. This is more purely for you to have a plan, execute on it, and then learn from your mistakes, because you're going to make mistakes. I made quite a lot of mistakes here, and you're going to see as this slowly comes together how the vertical lines really call for to be a little more like that, where instead they're going like this, the complete opposite way. But that's fine, I learned from it. This is actually a great example of negative painting. I absolutely love this because I'm leaving the architectural details on that triangular front of the church. I'm leaving them in. I don't know exactly what I'm painting. This is something important to understand because people always want to paint each and every detail. Honestly, I don't know. I take a few steps back, I squint my eyes, I try to see it in a simplified way, and then I just express it to the best of my abilities with the best shapes I can. Okay, so you're not going to have all the answers, and you won't be able to paint each and every detail unless you work in a very methodical, step-by-step, slow process, which not everyone's a fan of, Now, one thing that's important here, right now the sky and the light walls are of the same value, which is why I felt a bit of a need to push the sky to be a touch darker by just going over them with a flat wash and differentiating the walls, making the walls brighter and lighter compared to the rest of the scene. Okay, now as for the wet and wet work we did earlier, it's actually going to be visible because this is just a thin wash that covers everything up. It's not super thin, but it is thin, so you still will see some of that wet and wet. It's just going to be a little masked. Now we're bringing in a help from outside from a different palette because I didn't have this May green that's a very bright, beautiful green for grass. I didn't have it on this palette, so I'm using a mix of that and some sap green to mix this beautiful, beautiful green. I learned that sap green works well with my palette, so it's a convenience mix that still works well with my phthalo blue and, Indian yellow and yellow ochre and all of those. Now, I'm actually painting around these little wooden stake things. Not really sure what they are. Wasn't sure in the beginning I'm going to leave them in, but I decided to include them just for the fun of it. Usually I don't put objects that intersect with the edges of the painting. Right, in this example, it's the bottom edge. But I thought, let's give it a try and see. Let's try and paint it as it is in the photo reference. I would have honestly taken the photo a little differently, showing more of the ground, but different strokes, and I still love the original photo, which is why I decided to paint it. Now, as for these small details to the side, look at how, again, I'm going quite muted, quite one go. I don't dedicate too much attention to it. This is to the side. What's more important to me is the right side of the building with all these beautiful towers, as well as the actual towers in the middle, right? So I'm filling in, I'm continuing with this mid-value wash. That's usually the longest wash. Here, it's not that big of an area to paint because it's a very high key scene with a strong sunlight, direct sunlight. So the shadows become minimized, which is ideal for watercolor actually. But sometimes it'll be a more significant wash with bigger shapes. The sky could be considered a part of this too. Same goes for these beautiful, towers and details. You don't need much to establish them, and I want it all to support that main triangular thing in the front, and that window. That's like the main focal point to me. Now you decide your own focal point, right? That's just, it's a matter of choice what you want to show, the ideas you want to bring. Now look at all of these, again, vertical lines. They're very off, so I'm going to try and fix those soon with some opaque paint. You're going to see it's going to be an interesting process for sure. Now it's time to establish, before we get to the next stage, the darkest third wash, okay? This has the darkest details, the darkest shadows, and it is one where there's a lot of detail work. That's very similar to drawing in a way. Look at how putting in those subtle, slightly darker arches really puts everything in perspective, and not in the drawing sense of perspective, but in the overall context, right? The more darks you add, the more the scene in its entirety becomes more contextual, and it's a really fun process of seeing it come to life. It puts the mid values in the right place too. It really sets the entire tone for the piece. And usually that's when I'll realize if I did a good job in the first stages. I feel like, again, my establishment of big shapes here wasn't perfect, especially with the sky requiring another wash and with the the shapes themselves, but that's fine. Not the end of the world. Now, something I get asked about a lot is bricks and texture. How do you convey texture? So look at what's happening here. The entire wall is flat, but as soon as you add a few of these bricks here and there and random places, you immediately get the pattern. Your brain knows, oh, these are bricks. You don't need much, contrary to what a lot of people think, an attempt to paint each and every brick. You're never going to get out of it, and it's going to look way off. It's going to throw off the overall impression. You don't really want to do that. Do it minimally like I have here. Everyone will understand. Okay, now onto those fixes with opaque paint. So I've been playing around with mixing opaque paint with non-opaque paint. So what you see me here mixing is the yellow ochre together with my Joan Brilliant opaque white. And I'm trying to straighten out the shape of these vertical lines to some success. Okay, now as for the colors, again, I didn't really go over each and every one because it doesn't matter as much. Look at these beautiful highlights I'm adding to these stakes, fence, whatever it is in the foreground. But basically, phthalo blue, yellow ochre by Anbr, which is a recent favorite of mine, a bit of quinacridone rose, Daniel Smith, same as the phthalo blue, a bit of neutral tint just to get in those darks very easily. That's pretty much it. Details. This stage could be as long as you want. I find that if you establish the good shapes in the beginning and good washes, it's very hard to overwork this as long as you actually follow the details you see. One more detail I saw here is that kind of washed off feeling in the roof. So I'm doing the same thing with a bit of opaque paint to just get rid of some of the paint, make it paler, and I think that looks really cool and a good effect to make the roof look a little older, right? Now I'm layering right next to the darks a few highlights. One big characteristic of these windows, and honestly, if I do a more dedicated, kind of slower version of this painting, I'm going to put a lot more effort into it, is all of the details and nuances within the windows. Because the windows, if you look at it from afar and you squint your eyes, again, it's a flat kind of mid-value. But in it, there are a lot of shadows and a lot of highlights. Because of all of these metal railings around the glass that the sun hits them directly, and it creates this beautiful effect. It's a shame not to make the most out of, which is why I'll consider doing another attempt just to show you how a more dedicated effort can produce a better result. I think it's going to be a really interesting painting and a video too, just to paint this exact same scene but do it slower, more deliberate. I may do that. That's interesting. An interesting idea. Now as for the tree, what I see here is 1 green and 2 kind of dark black. So I do this a la prima. I put in the shape of the tree and then I go back with a very dark black and I do it wet and wet so that the meeting point between that black and green is blended. Okay, I'm not looking for overworking here to overwork this area. It's to this side, and I wasn't even sure I'm going to include it because it's so much to the side, and putting in a few random branches. But it was important for me to have a bit of a movement to balance out the solidness of the building, to have something a little more organic there, and that tree is the perfect thing for that. Yeah, putting in some last shadows, and we're really nearly done here. Just a few touches, puts everything in the right perspective, in the right context, and that's pretty much it. I'm gonna probably sign this one and remove the tape in just a few moments, but yeah, go ahead, paint. This is easy. It's not a tough process. Just focus on the shapes of value. Mix a lot of paint in advance. Feel free to do this black and white. You can do that too. Follow the steps I'm showing you. Just a few final touches, and here we go. Follow the steps I'm showing you in the first wash, second wash, third wash. You have the roadmap ahead of you, and if you just follow the process and trust it, you'll do well. And one thing that gets a lot of people stuck in that, and here's the final result, tape removed, is that desire or kind of misplaced desire to paint every small detail they see and having a very hard time to disconnect from that and just paint things in a fun way, in a loose way, which is the basis for being expressive a lot of the time with watercolor. And you can put that together with your technique to make your paintings perfect. And if that's your struggle, be sure to check out the frustration-free watercolor course. We'll put a link in the description box below. Let go, enjoy the painting process, get the results you want, and of course the watercolor realism course, which is another one. I'm very proud of that. We'll show you how to get a realistic result every single time. I want to thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you still aren't. Hit the bell. A lot of people have been telling me they don't get notifications for the live streams. Hit the bell button so you get notified whenever I go live. Don't forget to leave a like, a comment, let me know your thoughts, and I will see you in the next vid.